Welcome. Today's lecture is an introduction to parametric and pixel-based processing, so that is workflow. In the last semester, the aim was for you to learn how to use a digital SLR, that is, to manage the exposure controls and to develop a sense of image design and composition in your photography. So by now you should have a solid understanding of how to take a photograph. You should know the difference between shallow and deep depth of field. You should know how to freeze and blur movement. And you also should be able to develop this beautiful aesthetic in your work, that is your image design. To keep it simple, because that's a lot to learn in one semester for people that have never used a DSLR. So to keep it simple last semester, we asked you to capture your images in JPEG. And the only processing or post-production or the only handling of that JPEG file after the capture was to download it to your computer, open it up in Adobe Bridge to rate and to sort, and then to resize the file in Adobe Photoshop to upload it for assessment. Adobe Bridge will continue to be a very important part of your workflow as you move forward. So at some stage this semester we will have a revise of that part of the workflow. So this semester you'll be asked to capture your images in RAW format, and the focus will be beyond capture as we delve into the complex world of processing, post-production and preparation to print with fine art inkjet printers. You will still use Adobe Bridge to download, then rate and sort your photographs. However, Adobe Camera Raw will be used for processing these files, and Adobe Photoshop will be employed as a tool for soft proofing your images in preparation to print, and to also extend the creative component of your photographs. This lecture introduces you to the concepts of parametric and pixel-based workflows, their applications and their limitations. I will also introduce you to the idea of non-destructive and destructive processing and editing of your digital files using both ACR, that's Adobe Camera Raw, and Adobe Photoshop. So before I go on to speak about the workflow and the processing and the post-production, let's have a look at our capture options, because it's really important to understand why we have to go to this complex step. As a photographer, it's up to you to make the decision whether you shoot in JPEG or RAW. I'd like to go through some of the pros and cons of each of those file formats so you have an understanding of why we are introducing you to RAW capture and processing this semester. So your first option is capturing with JPEG and processing. So capturing JPEG images has some advantages, mostly around file size, capture speed and storage space because of its small file size. This leads me to the problems with JPEG capture. It is small. It's an 8-bit file, and the file is processed in camera for white balance, contrast, vibrancy and sharpness before it's then compressed and saved or written to your storage device, such as your SD card. These in-camera decisions are programmed by a set of instructions written by the camera supplier. This is problematic because you as an emerging imaging professional need to have control over what happens to your photographs as they are written to the storage device and how they appear as final polished images, that is, their output. Capturing only JPEG-size files is a problem as you are handing all those decisions over to the camera software. It is the camera which decides how your final image will look. And in the compression sequence, it's also the camera which decides which pixels are important, which are okay to delete. You also need to retain as much of the capture information as you can, and that is to produce a large file size. So I would suggest to you that as an imaging professional, JPEG capture has its place, but most times you'll be not looking to use that JPEG format. If you're shooting for sport and that you're uploading those images wirelessly continuously, then that RAW file will not be suitable, so you will have to be shooting JPEG. you have to be much more careful with your exposure, with your actual capture, because you don't want the camera to be making major decisions about your images via that software. So bearing all that in mind, let's look at the other option that we have, which is raw capture. This capture format solves all the problems regarding the small file size and 8-bit compression, and as well as the in-camera processing of your files. However, while these outcomes are an advantage, you will require more storage space because the files are larger. It can be a little bit slower shooting and writing to your card, depending on what speed card that you have. And this is something that we do need to talk about, the quality of your storage device in your camera. So with raw capture, larger file size, you need more storage space, you need a better quality of SD or compact flash card. With raw capture, the capture information or data is sent directly from the sensor and is saved to that storage device. And if you're shooting tethered, it'll be sent directly to the computer and saved. These files are like undeveloped film. They need to be developed. That is, they need to be processed by yourself using software such as Adobe Camera Raw, Lightroom or other proprietary program which comes with the camera you've purchased. So what format will you choose to capture your images? I would suggest if you're serious about photography, then you're going to choose a RAW format. And even though it creates more work for you, once you have begin to develop and understand your workflow, it's not that much harder. So what do I mean when I talk about pixel and parametric processing? So what happens with your file once it's transferred from the camera to the computer? When editing a JPEG file, remember that the processing has already been finalised in camera. So when you want to apply changes to a JPEG file, that is any post-production or amendments to the file are known as pixel-based editing. So you're making further changes to the decisions that the camera software has already made in an attempt to customise your image. One of the biggest problems with this decision is that each change you make is final. So every change you make to a JPEG file, you're actually replacing and deleting pixels. This is decisions that are final and cannot be undone. So each time you change the number value of the pixel or pixels, those original pixels or capture information is lost and replaced. This is referred to as destructive editing, as the pixels are destroyed and cannot be reformed to their original status. On an 8-bit file, the JPEG, it only takes a couple changes. So you open your JPEG file up, you apply these changes, you save it. And you come back another day and you want to open that JPEG file up, apply some changes and save it. It only takes a few of these type of editing sessions for you to start doing damage to your file. Whilst there is a place in the overall workflow for some pixel-based editing, I'm going to suggest to you it's not at this point. Your workflow needs to start from a raw file and then be finalised as a pixel-based file. With a raw file though, as indicated earlier, you're working with raw data or information directly from the sensor which has not been compressed or processed. This is an important point. You'll be working with raw data, thus the name. Working with raw process software such as ACR, Adobe Camera Raw, Lightroom or other, you will have the opportunity to apply a customised set of changes to your image file. But at no time is this a destructive process. You can go back to that same body of data and change the look of the image numerous times without any problems. So working with raw data in a raw processing software is an opportunity to apply non-destructive amendments or changes to the captured pixels. This is known as parametric processing. So the next important fact is that you will apply these changes to the file globally, which is parametric. But there's also an opportunity in this Adobe RAW processing software to apply localized fine-tuning as well. Through the use of software such as ACR and parametric processing, you will create a digital master file of your image. It's from this file that you have the opportunity to upsize, downsize, and output very different versions of the file, and most importantly, have absolute creative control while not destroying any of the original data exported from the sensor. You can batch process your files, so that is, you can apply similar changes to a group of images. This is a very efficient way of working with multiple files. Parametric processing is an efficient and a professional way of dealing with your work. So what I've just described to you is a workflow model. So at this point, I'd like to suggest to you that Adobe Camera Raw, as a raw processing software, is actually a lot less complex than Adobe Photoshop. There's so many tools in Adobe Photoshop, and sometimes you don't quite know where to start. At least with Adobe Camera Raw, it's laid out in a logical and sequential order, and as we go through this semester, you'll see that this logical sequential order of working with Adobe Camera Raw builds up that basic workflow for you. So embrace this workflow to assist in lessening the time spent at the computer, and of course more time out photographing, because that's what you want to do, you're photographers. And unfortunately, or no, some of you may like to work with the computer, but because now we're having to process our own files, we do have to split our time between actually capturing the images and processing and preparing them for output. So in this lecture, and in the subsequent lectures, I would like to establish parametric and pixel-based workflows from start to finish, from capture right through to output. And I'll establish a workflow which will provide a framework for a safe manner to work with, extend and transform your image files. And finally, we'll look at soft proofing and producing wonderful prints. It is only at the print stage that you can really assess the quality and the success of your photography, both capture and processing. So let's just unpack what workflow is for 1 second. So for me, workflow is a series of steps that will take you from A to B. It's a series of steps that you follow for a particular set outcome. These steps are always sequential, and they scaffold one to the next. With digital photography, there are many different workflows. And so even though initially I'll look at providing you a framework of one workflow, you find as you become more confident, you'll alter that depending on what you want to do with your photographs. So with the workflows, it's dependent on your output as well. So the workflow to print is very different to the workflow to to be hosted to a website or even for projection, so screen-based work. So bearing in mind the information I provided you regarding the destructive nature of pixel-based post-production, I definitely won't be going through any workflows for editing JPEG images. This semester we'll focus in the first place on raw process workflow. So processing your files, digital files in ACR, Adobe Camera Raw, or Lightroom is defined as parametric workflow. That is, there are global changes made to the entire file which result in the creation of a digital master file. Now that's a very important term for you to think about. So you're going to your input files, your input information, you're going to apply input processing to and create a digital master file. From that digital master file, you can extract as many different types of output options as you desire. The beauty of working in Adobe Camera Raw and with this raw data as well is remember that you're never actually changing those pixels. We're never losing any pixels. All that it does is it changes how the file appears. So really when we're applying these changes in Adobe Camera Raw, it's like a filter or a lens for viewing how the final file will be viewed. And the raw capture data may be processed in a number of different ways and saved again as a DNG or a digital negative, okay, as copies. So from that original raw capture, I can output that same file, and with a new naming protocol, so I've processed it and I want to process it and export it as a black and white file. So I just add that naming protocol to the file and save it as a DNG. And then I might want to save, I'll do another workflow, another processing to that file, and I want it to be vivid, really saturated colour. So I export it, and with that file name and with the added name of vivid, all of a sudden I have two raw files. So I've still got all the data, remember, nothing's been lost. I've got a black and white, a vivid, and a normal processed image. So you can have as many of these DNG files with that information, that all the processing information stored within the file, and at any point there you haven't lost any of the information. It's an absolutely non-destructive workflow. So just to recap, the aim of parametric processing is to create a digital master file from which you can extract multiple outputs and they can be of your own desired, of lots of different sizes, pixel size, pixel depth, so you can output at 16-bit, you can output at 8-bit if you're wanting to still have an output as a JPEG to email. You can still, from that raw file, save it as a JPEG at 8-bit. If you're wanting to send a large file to the printer, then you can output as a TIFF at 16-bit. So you're giving yourself the best opportunity to maintain the integrity of your capture information.